Hi, I'm Nikki and I am currently a horticultural advisor for the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, and I've worked in horticulture for 35 years or more. I won't say exactly how many because obviously that would reveal my age. I started doing an apprenticeship at Oxford Botanic Gardens, and I've worked in commercial horticulture, amenity horticulture, right through to teaching horticulture at both FE and HE level.
Wow,
very Claire?
My name is Claire Lakey, and I'm currently working at Hadlow College as programme leader for garden design. I've been working in horticulture and design for 25 years. I did my degree at Hadlow, Greenwich University, in garden design. I worked for John Brooks for a short time, and then I've been running my own business, designing and building gardens in London and in the countryside. So a mixture of roof terraces, small private gardens, commercial sites, and really big, lovely country estates. So it's been quite interesting.
So what would you say has been your most challenging brief in garden design? You talk about roof gardens, they're really hot topic at the moment. Is that something you did recently, or has it actually been building for a long time, the interest in that type of thing?
I used to have a stall at Borough Market selling plants, and I got to meet quite an interesting group of people, clients who had riverside properties. So they would always talk to me about the plants that I was selling, and then they'd invite me to go and have a look at their gardens, their roof terraces. And that's how I got into it. Most people couldn't choose plants for those environments, so they'd bought loads of plants, and loads of plants had died. And then I said, oh, well, actually, I could help you with that. There is a kind of select palette of plants that we can use, and I can get them to thrive and I can get them to live. So that was quite interesting for people, because that was kind of a bold claim, because they'd spent sometimes thousands of pounds on plants that just died within a couple of weeks.
That's really interesting, because that sort of brings us to the topic of our conversation today, which is why we need to be able to identify our plants using the botanical names, and why is that important. And actually, you've just demonstrated that knowing what plants are good for the right place, but knowing that in depth, knowing the correct names of those plants, and therefore understanding their habits and cultural requirements, makes a huge difference in terms of time and money.
And one of the things that I've encountered in my career with lots of most of my work was through word of mouth, and I became known as a plants person. So there were lots of my clients would have had several attempts generally at getting work done, and they'd show me all the plants that had a landscaper in, and then then they'd show me all the dead plants. So they had people who knew about landscaping but not about plants, and not about picking plants for the right area. So that's how I got a lot of my work, interestingly.
So very much geared towards knowing the plants and understanding the plants that were available, but knowing the names of those plants and having that knowledge enables you, not just on a professional level, but at an amateur level, just even in your own gardens, to know that the plant you're using is suitable for the place that you're putting it into.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It saves loads of money, loads of time. And people often think, oh, I don't have green fingers. Actually, you probably do. It's just that you're picking the wrong plant. We need to just find out about that plant. Once you've got the right plant, then it kind of looks after itself, and then you get your green fingers.
Lots of people are put off by botanical names.
Yeah.
And I think we've both found that with our work in teaching, particularly in the FE sector, the further education sector. But I think, in my experience of many years in the industry, that it's one of the most important skills in whatever aspect of horticulture you work in, whether you're working in a garden centre, whether you're a landscaper, whether you're working in a private garden, and that might be an estate, or it might be a jobbing gardener going from one garden to another. Working on nurseries, it's essential, but also it's something that brings the whole industry together. And I think, I don't know how you feel, but I think it's a skill that we're maybe not putting enough time and importance on.
Yeah, I think there's the idea. I agree with you. I think naming the plants, as a designer, they are my palette. So if you're a plumber, you know how to get water in a pipe. To not a very good example, but if I'm a garden designer, I need to know what my materials are, and I need to name them. Like a plumber needs to name the diameter of the pipe. They need to know what they're working with. So unless I can name them, I can't really express that to my client or to the people who are working with me, or I can't choose them myself. I can't articulate what I want them to do.
That's actually a really good point. And whilst, a plumber, anybody who has a skilled trade needs to understand the materials they're working with. So whether that's, what's the pipe made of, what's the job it's doing, all of those things actually feed into knowing the right name for different parts of a car, don't they? It's a similar thing. And botanical names are important because common names don't often give us a lot of information, but can also give us the wrong information or a very small part of that information, and they vary so much from plant to plant. I was doing some work on Sambucus today, elderberry, but when I was looking, doing some research on that genus of plants, there's 15 different common names for them, depending on the region in this country that you come from. And that's the same with bluebells. In England, a bluebell is Hyacinthoides non-scripta, but in Scotland, it's Scilla nutans, so completely different genus of plant, not even a different cultivar. So I think that gives two quite good examples of why we need to be encouraging people to look at botanical names. Have you come across similar things in your working?
A lot of clients would talk to me about common names, Virginia creeper, Boston ivy, that kind of thing, and students as well. But particularly for students, where I'm trying to encourage them to use the Latin names so that they can develop this skill and go into industry. It's quite confusing. What's the difference between a Virginia creeper and a Boston ivy? It's quite hard to work out what that is. But if I'm using the Latin, Parthenocissus tricuspidata, I can identify it with tricuspidata means it has 3 lobes, and Parthenocissus quinquifolia has 5 fingers, and I can tell the difference.
So you've got tri and quin, and
yeah. And I can
identify you information about the plant. Sorry, Claire, go on.
Yeah, and I kind of work it out from there, and I don't have to kind of double back. And whilst I understand that there's kind of a lot of folklore with common names, when working with plants in thinking of them, considering them as a palette of plants and as materials, I need to be really precise about what that plant is going to do for me. That's why I want the correct labelling and correct names so that I can pass that information on.
And that's, again, quite interesting when people talk about, for example, jasmine. And I had a query about this yesterday in the course of my work. Somebody had a jasmine that wasn't performing very well. I was trying to identify it from a description. It turns out actually it was Traculospermum jasminoides, which needs quite different cultivation and treatment to Jasminum nudiflorum, for example, which is winter jasmine. And obviously then there's Jasminum officinale. So jasmine as a common name covers so many things, and it becomes meaningless because if you recommended pruning it as for Jasminum nudiflorum, it would be completely wrong for Traculospermum jasminoides.
And there's something lovely about jasmine and nudiflorum. It flowers on the nude wood, so there are no leaves, and it tells you something about it.
Yes, and also Trachelospermum jasminoides, it's telling you that its flower is similar to jasmine and it's scented. So you're getting information from the correct botanical names, which I think is really important. And whilst not all botanical names are Latin, there's some Greek in there as well. Latin is a very phonetic language. You can say it however you want. The Romans were all dead. Nobody knows what was actually the accent used there, and it's very descriptive.
And I think there's something, I'm laughing about that because I think there's an awful lot of snobbery about Latin names. Look, we just need to be able to have a bit of spontaneity, have a go, let's try and do this, and not worry about getting it completely wrong or right. I mean, I think for me, this podcast is about inclusivity and getting people to engage with plants. So just have a go at it, the Latin.
Absolutely. I think that we've learned how to say Latin names because the people that taught us said it in a particular way. So I say Chinomyles, some people say Chinomyles or Chinomyles. It actually doesn't really matter because
I still know what you're saying.
We know exactly that what we're talking about. We're talking about Chinomyles japonica Knaphill scarlet or Chinomyles japonica Knaphill scarlet. It's exactly the same plant.
Yeah.
So if we understand the names of our plants and if we start to learn them correctly with that botanical system, it's something that it's a skill that's great for people that want to go into horticulture as a career. I would say essential, but it's also really useful for just in your own garden. If you're a keen gardener or just a beginner, try and learn just one a week. If you're buying a plant, try and learn the name of it so that you can remember what that name is and treat the plant properly. That would be pruning it at the right time, feeding it at the right time, watering it at the right time, general cultivation. So how do we start identifying them correctly?
Well, I know we've talked about this we've talked about this before, and we've had to backtrack. We've both been in the industry for quite a long time, so there's a lot of inherent knowledge. We don't kind of know how much we know and how much we've simultaneously forgotten.
Yes.
And that's another thing about plant knowledge and learning names. Unless you're using it, you forget it. So it's something to keep practicing. It's a skill that you keep honing and working on. How do we remember them? So identifying plants, what are the key characteristics? You know, what's drawn you to the plant? So you've come across something, you're in the grounds of a hotel and you've seen a lovely plant and it has green leaves.
Yes.
And what else?
Yeah. So top tip, if you're listening to this, don't go into a garden centre and say, I've got a plant with green leaves and blue flowers, what is it? Because that covers many millions of plants and the poor member of staff will obviously not probably straight at you roll their eyes, but it is quite a wearing question. So think about, as Claire says, what drew you to the plant? Can you describe it in more detail? Are the leaves soft? Is the plant evergreen? Is it flowering in May or June, July? Describing it and describing what you've noticed about it that's made you ask the question is really important. So there's lots of different shades of green. Some leaves are soft, some are hairy, some are waxy, some are quite finely dissected, aren't they? And you were telling me the other day that you'd gone for a walk and noticed a plant that you weren't sure about.
Yes, so walking with my son on a trying to social distance on a kind of funny little track which was slightly disused. So I live in London, and so it was a tree with a catkin. But what I noticed first was the fact that it was buzzing. It was absolutely laden with bees, normal bees, hoverflies, and some bumblebees. And I just thought, oh gosh, that's really interesting. I looked at it and I thought, well, I had a stab at it, and I thought, well, it looks like a willow, but because it had been pruned, it had been damaged, it had been coppiced, it was in such a contorted, weird place, I couldn't work out what it was. So I took some photographs of the catkins, and I took photographs of the bark, and I've managed to deduce from that it's Salix caprea, and that's a really common willow. But because I hadn't seen it in that environment, and it was so it'd been hacked around and damaged, I couldn't place it.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting, actually, isn't it? If you see a plant that you know, but it's out of context, or it's been treated in a way that it isn't normally treated, sometimes it's quite hard to identify it. Yeah. Even if you do know what it is, it's not how it would normally look. So you have to stop and think.
And there's something about the seasonality in that as well. I hadn't seen it with, I see that plant as something I'm always weeding out. It's self-seeding. So I'm not seeing it as a really mature tree that is also really great for wildlife. I hadn't seen it fully developed.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
That was interesting.
Yeah, because when you said to me, "Oh, what do you think this plant was?" It's covered in bees. You
don't think of willow.
Salix caprea covered in bees. Yeah. That seems quite odd. But then actually, if you look at mature ivy growing up through trees,
fantastic.
They're fantastic for bees and pollinators. So again, it's not necessarily in a situation ivy is normally clipped. It's used as a wall shrub or a climber. So you don't often see it in its maturity, flowering and covered in all of those insects. So I think what we're saying here is look at what's attracted you to the plant and actually think about how you would describe the shape of the flower. Are there lots of tiny flowers all together, almost like a plate? Thinking of elderberry, sambucus, or are they just one large flower like roses can be? Stem colour is important, but also I think another thing people could practice is identifying a plant when its main point of interest isn't there.
Oh yeah, I saw a fantastic cornus, and I could tell it was a cornus because it didn't have any red stems. It hadn't been pruned. So the red stems had been kind of worn out. And I took a photograph of it for students, knowing that it kind of flummoxed them. But I could tell because of the way the stems were arranged, and there were some leftover flower heads. Now, it's really interesting looking at plants when they're not pruned as we normally know them. Dogwood is always hard pruned to give you that winter interest. So we need to look at lots of different characteristics to be able to catch it, to work out what it is. And
that is important, because often how you need to cultivate that plant, for example, the time it's best to prune it, or best to move it if you want to move it. Do you need to feed it? What do you need to harvest seed from it? You might be doing all of these things at the point where it's lost its main aesthetic appeal. And if you need to be able to remember what the name is and identify it from other characteristics. So that might be the leaves, the type of seed pod. For example, on Euonymus alatus or magnolias. Magnolia seed pods are fantastic.
Yes,
I think. Obviously, I'm a bit weird. I would say it's a niche thing.
but I noticed that on street trees, Magnolia grandiflora is interesting as a street tree.
Mm.
I see more and more of them planted in London, but it's the seed pod. It's those distinguishing characteristics, and this takes me to aesthetic appeal that we're talking about it. But one of the other reasons why I think I'm going to talk for both of us here is that this intimate knowledge of plants and getting to know them. It's quite a joy, a fascination for me to be able to have this conversation, because we're looking at all the detail of plants.
Yeah, so that might be. Are the leaves opposite or alternate? Are they directly opposite each other on a stem, or are they alternate up the stem? Lots of people get liquid amber styraciflua, the common name of which I genuinely don't know.
Oh, no. No, I don't know. I can try and do that.
We will look that up later for you. Mixed up with acers, particularly Acer palmatum, because it has a similar trilobed and sometimes five-lobed leaf.
Yeah.
But actually, liquid amber is alternate, and acers are always opposite. The whole genus, the leaves are opposite. So again, it's a little detail, but it's a way of identifying them when they've got no leaves on, because you can see the buds.
Yeah, and that's it. It could be sweet gum. Liquid amber could be. I don't know. So I'm shooting from the hip there. So
Sweet gum.
And that's the point. This makes it's a good point in like liquid amber, styraciflua, but we just know what it is, and the other stuff it could be. Also, it probably has about 5 common names.
Yeah, and actually, if you say, it's a sweet gum, I don't know. I would probably think that was the eucalyptus or something. Yeah. That's a gum tree. I don't know. Yeah. So another demonstration of how botanical classifications and that genus and species is really important to try and to get to grips with in your garden.
Yeah, love all that clarity and lack of confusion. It's just a nice thing. Like we all know, what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When I say,
and everybody in the industry does. When we order plants for in the commercial world, when I was a commercial manager at Hadlow and being manager of garden centres and various jobs that I've had in my life, you order the plants by the botanical name. You don't. The whole industry runs on those correct naming, so it's only the end user, actually, the public, that are using the common names. And I think it's just a really interesting exercise for people because people are scared of using the botanical names, but actually there's nothing scary about them. They give you so much information. They tell you so much, particularly the species names. So Rosa rugosa, it is a pretty rugged plant. It's rough and ready. It's telling you that, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is. It is a great plant, by the way, for that reason.
When we both taught plant identification as lecturers, you probably more than me now, actually. What did you find useful? What tricks could you use to get students to get into the habit of learning botanical names?
Well, I think one of the first things is about making it not intimidating. It's making it fun, accessible, and then also never using common names. Just so from the get-go, we are going to do this thing. We're going to talk about plants with Latin names, and explain to them how they relate to the actual plant that we've got in front of us, but making it fun. So we're picking out the distinguishing characteristics. I might pick those out, but actually some of the students will pick those out as well. So things like Azara, we might talk about it. It's an evergreen tree with tiny little leaves, but it has this really distinctive scent. And because it's Easter, I say, it smells of chocolate. It comes out. It would have been out just now, a bit before.
Yeah, sort of late March, early April, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd say it smells of chocolates, and then the students would say, oh, actually no, it smells of mini eggs. So once they've got the fact that, you know, we've got this tree and they've got a picture, they've built a story up about it, we know where it is, and they've got this other funny little detail, they imagine mini eggs hanging from this tree, that they can connect the story, the words, the name, and put it all together. So
that memory hook is important, isn't it?
Yeah, and everyone's got a different memory hook. Some people don't need to do that. I did speak to some other students, and they said, actually no, I just look at the Latin and I just learn it by rote. And then the other people in the group said, oh, actually no, we swap. I put names on cards, and some people then they started sharing silly stories, which made the lesson quite fun. But actually, then in terms of testing, they got those names really quickly. By the end of the lesson, like, we've learnt 10 and you've remembered 10, and you've got the characteristics and you know what it does.
Yeah. So there's more than one thing. You can't, to just look at the plant and then to try and remember the name can be quite difficult. I learn things by rote much easier than using a memory hook, but I think that's not very common, and is maybe because I am so old that's how I was used to being taught.
Yeah.
But I think using all your senses, I found teaching plant get them to hold pieces of the plant. Leaves feel different to other leaves, so some feel quite plasticky, for example, or we would say in the industry they're waxy, but I certainly found with further education saying, actually, what does this feel like? And plastic was a word that they used quite a lot to describe, and then writing down their own descriptive words. So you can do that at home. Just write down 5 things to describe a plant that you really like and you want to look after. And I think that then that they become the memory hooks, don't they?
Yeah. And there's something about that idea about being really connected to plants, touching, feeling, sensory. It's an experience. So it's prickly. Actually, it smells. It actually smells really horrible.
But that's something you remember, isn't it?
About it, you think, oh God, that is a horrible smell. Like Choisia tonata. You know, some people think it smells of cat's pee. Some people quite like it. Some candle companies have made a candle scented with the name Choisia.
Really? Because I think it smells of cat wee, so I wouldn't like that candle very much at all.
No, but isn't it really interesting? And they're 50 quid each, these candles. You think, really? Oh, that's fascinating.
I might just get my cat to wee in some wax and see if that works.
And so there's all these distinguishing characteristics. So sometimes we share those kind of weird little stories and you think, oh God, I've never looked at it like that. And it kind of rounds off the experience and it goes in. I think, I don't know how the brain works and with scent, but knowing that scent and attaching words to it helps it kind of embed into the memory.
I think scent is really important. And actually, if you sometimes remember, if you smell something and you think, oh God, that reminds me of my childhood, doesn't it? Or I remember that smell from when I was doing such and such with my granddad. So I think smell can be a really important memory hook, and you can often not really get a scent from a plant unless you touch it.
Yes.
So I don't know about you, but my children who are grown up now, they're 18 and 21. But they have always taken the mickey out of me because when I walk, I constantly touch plants. I do it in people's gardens when we've been invited around for a barbecue or whatever. And it's obviously been terminally embarrassing for them. But I can't not do it. I've just always done it through work because I'm feeling the texture of the plant. And sometimes you get a scent from something that you didn't realise had one.
I think one of my favourite types of planting is winter scented planting. So some people are not into Mahonias, but I quite like Mahonias. They see it as kind of a car parky plant, but the Mahonia charity fantastic smells of old ladies' talc, really old-fashioned.
Oh yes, it does.
And
I hadn't thought of
that's
that.
really lovely. But the idea of there's the difference between scent and aromatic planting. So when you're touching and brushing past things, it's the crushing the foliage in your hand, and then you've got the scent of flowers. They're kind of two different things.
Yes.
I particularly, so herbs, culinary, non-culinary herbs, using those in a garden in those areas.
And making sure they're in a place that you are going to be crushing them, maybe standing on them, because that, particularly with things like oregano, releases loads of scent, doesn't it? If you stand on it.
Yeah, I saw. So now we're talking about Latin names, but I'm just going to go into a bit of common names. Deary me, you can wrap my knuckles. So baby's tears.
So Helexine. It's not Helexine anymore. Is it Solari?
Yes. Yeah. And so then I had a client who we had some Moroccan mint, which has tiny, tiny, tiny leaves. But when the water droplets fell from his water feature, fell onto this Moroccan mint, it was incredibly strong. And you think, this stuff is so tiny. But it has such a lot of impact. But if you were looking at it from a distance, you would just think, oh, actually, I'm going to weed that out. There's all this old mossy stuff in the cracks. We've got to clear that out. But it's only that when you start touching it or you get close to it that you realise, actually, we need to have a closer look at this and see what it is.
Yeah, and it was the impact that it has.
So
it's a really good choice of plant and a huge impact in the garden, and actually just through using a very common plant.
Yeah, but I don't know the Latin name for. But there you go. That's another great example about why the snobbery about.
I've just pathetically looked up the Latin name for Helexine, baby's tears. Yeah. So it's been reclassified, and it is Solorolia solerolii. And actually, I can't pronounce that correctly. But interestingly, I should be able to, because a few weeks ago I bought 4 of them. Don't go there. And I decided in a seed tray with no holes to make a shower mat, because I hate bath mats. So when you come out of the bath or the shower, they're just horrible and soggy and disgusting, and they repulse me. So I decided to make one out of plants. So I did, and it worked. So it's completely filled the seed tray, because obviously it's quite invasive. And I put it in the bathroom, and once again, my entire family were like, "What are you doing, mother?"
That's fantastic.
Or in the case of my husband, like, really? Wow. But it was brilliant. You get out of the shower and you stand on it, and it loves being crushed. It makes no difference to it.
Wow.
And it absorbs all the water off your feet, and you don't have to wash a horrible bath mat.
Well, that's not good. There's a bit of sensory experience, mindfulness, getting out of the shower.
Yes. So if I'm ever rich enough to have my own bathroom designed, I'm going to have that plant as the floor.
That's great, though, isn't it? And also, what I like about that is just experimenting. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. And the great thing about horticulture, and especially if you put horticulture and design together, like, it's never ending. I mean, the amount of stuff that you will learn is amazing, but the amount of stuff that you still won't know is equally amazing. And if you've just got an open mind, it's a really it's just such
it's a vast industry, I think, that people don't appreciate. I think one of my bugbears, I think, is that there are a lot of gardening programs on telly, but they very much focus on just, tiggling about in your own garden, in a way that Countryfile, for example, for agriculture, covers the whole breadth of the industry. And horticulture is much, much bigger than just doing a bit of weeding, and it's commercial. All of those plants in garden centres, they are produced to a really skilled level for them to be perfect for you to buy. So you've got ornamental production, you've got food production. Your tomatoes come under horticulture, and that's hydroponics, and it's really technical, really interesting. You've got your amenity gardening, so that might be at somewhere like Wisley, but it might be local parks and gardens, or it could be your gardener coming into your garden. There's teaching. There's a huge amount of research currently about well-being, mental health.
I think this pandemic is really highlighting the importance of outdoor spaces, green spaces. So as part of my teaching the degree, I'm teaching master planning at a really large scale. So my area covers that. And I think people really have taken it for granted that they have that they have access to an outdoor space. But when it's taken away, it's really, really stressful.
And debilitating, I think, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also, I think highlighting what is happening to the horticultural industry with all of these plants being thrown away, not being able to connect, all these growers having all these amazing plants in tip-top condition, that they've got nowhere for them to go now. And people are aware of the plight of these growers.
And unlike agriculture, we don't get any subsidies. No. And actually, as a percentage of GDP, we are worth as much as agriculture. And that's maybe a subject for another podcast, because I can probably rant on about that for ages. But garden tourism is another aspect. You know, if you think a lot of people, when you go to visit somewhere, garden tourism is huge. If you go to Hampton Court, you're looking at the gardens, aren't you? That type of thing is massive. I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up now, because we've probably chatted for ages. In our next podcast, we will actually start looking at how you can identify some of the more interesting and some of the more common plants that you maybe have in your garden, or that you might want to have. Hope you've enjoyed listening to this. Over to you, Claire.
Yep, it's been good. I'm looking forward to identifying some of the common plants. I can remember graduating from my degree and realising I only knew some of the really, really snobby ephemeral plants, and I just hadn't got to grips with the really boring ones, but they're great, that the doers that we have in the garden.
I completely agree. I did, after finished my national diploma back in a different century. I thought I had quite good plant knowledge, but it builds over the years, and I still see plants that I don't know what they are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.